Well, not August 12th, huh? Let's try this. This Wednesday, July 8th is now in business. So I'm going to read this to explain to anybody that has public comments. Public comment limitations. Although CAMPO often provides an opportunity for additional public comment during each specific item designated for possible action on the agenda, public comment will be temporarily limited to the beginning of the agenda before any action is taken, and again at the end before adjournment. This policy will remain effective during the period of time the state of Nevada is under the state of emergency as declared by the governor due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and is intended to achieve efficient conduct of meetings while facilitating public participation via video conference and telephonic means. So we're back to the agenda. Can I get roll call, please?
Chair Kimbrough.
Here.
Vice Chair Stedfield.
Here.
Member Bagwell. Here. Member Bonkowski.
Here.
Member Erb. Member Hastings.
Here.
Member McQuarrie.
Here.
Member ex officio Member Rosenberg.
Here.
A quorum's present.
Great, thank you. Is there any agenda items may taken out or anything? Dirk?
No changes to the agenda, Chair.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any disclosures for today's meeting? Looking at the screen, seeing no hands here. I see no disclosures. Public comments. Is there any public comment?
I see no public comment, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is the minutes. Can I have an action or any changes?
I move to approve the minutes of the Carson Area Metropolitan Planning Organization for June 10th, 2020 as presented.
Greg, second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you. Public meeting. Now we move into the public meeting. Item 6A, for information only. Staff from the Department of Transportation, NDOT, will provide a presentation on the One Nevada Transportation Plan. And Lucia, I believe you're going to intro.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Lucia Maloney, Transportation Manager. Kevin Berry is here virtually this evening to provide a presentation on the One Nevada Transportation Plan. Although, as you know, we have our own CAMPO plans, we do fall under the state's umbrella and we have a role to play in implementation of the statewide plan as well. So Kevin will tell you more about it and we're really thankful that he's here. Take it away, Kevin.
All right, thank you. For the record, my name's Kevin Berry, Nevada Department of Transportation. Sounds like everybody can hear me okay. This is going to be a little tricky. I assume you guys are seeing the first slide. One Nevada implementation, project prioritization, July 2020. Just to give you guys a quick overview, you aren't seeing that. Oh, there it is. Perfect. I can see it now as well. Appreciate that. NDOT decided that it was time to start implementing the One Nevada Transportation Plan. And in doing so, we decided that we'd tackle the prioritization for our current STIP, which is the 2124 that's currently out for public comment. Next slide, Dirk. So I'm going to give you a quick background on the One Nevada Transportation Plan. I'm also going to provide some details on the prioritization framework and then some next steps. Next slide. So, as you guys are aware, the department adopted the One Nevada Transportation Plan in 2018. And with that, we wanted to really push forward with a performance-based long-range transportation plan. The plan itself really laid out the framework to start the prioritization process internally. Next slide. So now I'm going to quickly talk about some of the framework within the prioritization. In theory, prioritization seems fairly straightforward, but there's a lot of caveats to it. Next slide. So the One Nevada, really what we want to do is look at not only establishing good prioritization, good criteria, but we want to do it not only for the STIP, but also any needs. So really what we'd like to do is start building out a 20-year list of projects, needs that we can then use to feed our STIP. We aren't quite there yet, so what we decided to do is really focus in on the number four, the STIP project prioritization piece of this. That's where we're really at right now. And the reason why we wanted to tackle that is we wanted to validate what the department's already doing and the way we're selecting projects, and also provide some transparency in what those projects should provide in terms of performance, and also moving our goals as established within the One Nevada plan. Next slide. So the department decided to take a MODA approach, which is a multi-objective decision analysis, if I'm correct in that, Sandra? Yes. So what that is it's a really complex spreadsheet. And what we needed to do in order to get MODA to work correctly is establish criteria, define measures as well as scales, and then develop that project list. We had a project list within our existing STIP. We then incorporated a lot of our projects that are on our resource list, and then ultimately you have to weight that criteria. So next slide. So what we first did is we started the development of the criteria, and this was an internal development. We basically got what we called SMEs, subject matter experts, together and started looking at all the data points that we had that we could maybe use to measure the potential success of projects in certain goal areas. Next slide, please. So through a couple of pretty extensive meetings, we were able to establish the criteria that we'd use for each goal area. As you can see, this is a really good overview of the goals: enhance safety, preserve infrastructure, optimize mobility, transform economies, foster sustainability, and connecting communities. So those are our goal areas, and then underneath, we describe the criteria we were going to use to measure how a project could potentially move in that goal area. So next slide, I'm sorry. So basically what we had to do is really look at, could we simplify it or make it super complex? And the one thing that we sort of landed on was, if we make it too complex, it's going to be too hard to really do on a repetitive, repeatable basis. So we had to balance it. So as you can see, the next 10 slides are pretty detailed. And so what I want to really do is go through them, and they're really looking at that criteria at a pretty detailed level. But if you go to the next slide, you can see for enhanced safety, we chose the crash reduction potential of a project or an improvement. Next slide. So for preserve infrastructure, we looked at pavement condition. Next slide. This is still within the preserving infrastructure. We looked at bridge condition improvement. Next slide. And then ultimately, if we were going to improve another asset within the project, this could be simply replacing guardrail, fencing, things like that. So as you can see, there are three criteria that are helping us measure how we're preserving infrastructure for each project that we were going to prioritize. The next slide is optimizing mobility. These are a little tougher. We chose population accessibility. And then also, next slide, please, Dirk. Sorry, this is a little cumbersome. We also wanted to look at travel time reliability within optimizing mobility. And then the fourth goal is transform economies. We have two there. business accessibility, and then economic development potential. Oh, sorry, I forgot to say next slide. So we're on slide 17, if you guys are following along. The next goal area was foster sustainability. And we have quite a few measures for this. One was to reduce environmental risk. Next slide. The next was to try to look at HGH reduction and other environmental enhancements. Next slide. The next was resiliency. And I think finally, for foster sustainability, we wanted to reduce future maintenance. And so that fits more with foster sustainability in terms of financial. And then the final goal area was connecting communities. And we have 3 criteria that we used within that goal area. Project connectivity, looking how the potential connections a potential project could do for connecting communities. The next is multimodal access. And then the final was access to community destinations such as not only recreation, but also healthcare facilities and education. So part of this also included, next slide please, weighting that criteria. And really we met with leadership, or leadership met and really decided how they wanted each of the goal areas to be weighted. And what we needed to do is balance those criteria. If a goal area had 3 or more, we wanted to make sure that those 3 equaled 1 would balance or be more, I guess, in sync with something like the preserve infrastructure and enhance safety. Enhanced safety only has 1 criteria, but it's going to have the same weight as foster sustainability, which has 3 criteria. The next step we did was harmonization. So the MODA tool explained to us, here are how the projects are ranking, and then ultimately that's a printout, that's a computer telling us how these are doing based on some data points. Then we looked at the list and said, okay, let's really take a good hard look at what this is telling us so that we can also justify it in terms of readiness, funding availability, and then ensuring that we were going to be able to deliver the projects that we felt were meeting the highest priority. So we have, next slide. We're on 27, next steps. Next slide. So the next steps are really to continue to refine the prioritization process. Like I said, we were able to prioritize our up and coming 21-24 STIP work program. What we really want to do is start working backwards into midterm and long-term needs and understanding how we can start prioritizing those to feed the STIP and work program correctly, so that we're working on the right projects at the right time. And then we also want to engage some more of the stakeholders, mainly MPOs, so that as we work through this, they understand what we're doing in terms of prioritization. We really want to sync up any corridor studies that are done locally so that needs that are coming out of that are actually prioritized with the rest of the needs of any corridor so that things are more uniform. So with that, I'll welcome any questions.
Any questions?
Thank you, guys.
Okay, well, Kevin, I got one. If did anybody raise their hand and I can't see it? Maybe not. Well, I'm going to start with myself here. Kevin, I guess that the MPOs should understand this well enough, because aren't you guys going to look, when you do your system, with this is pretty fancy database here. I don't know who's keeping the database, but that's a full-time job probably. But aren't the MPOs going to need to understand and actually use this a little bit so they can show and feed what you guys have done those work on, the priorities? Am I right or wrong?
So you are right. So we only prioritized NDOT-led projects.
Right.
We're currently just looking at NDOT-led projects. You guys are still prioritizing your projects for your tips, and we'll automatically incorporate those tips into this tip. What's important is that we're all moving in the same direction in terms of those goals. How you measure how you're working towards those goals is completely up to your region, in my opinion. We're more than happy to bring any MPO along for what we're trying to do. It's a complicated situation. It's not going to be something that we're going to get perfect right away. This is we're going to continually refine and understand it. Realize that assigning value for those criteria to each project takes an immense amount of time, especially if you can't or haven't taken a hold of the GIS platform and really said, okay, we're going to start managing our data a little bit better, so it's a lot easier to assign some of these values based on the criteria to these projects that potentially could be delivered.
And Chair, if I may, Dirk Warren for the record, we do work with NDOT quite a bit. We share information, whether it's on our tribal demand model or if it's regarding priorities. You know, for example, on our tribal demand model, we see issues and problems with US 50 and US 395. And so we're beginning to talk with them to make sure that we have that project, whether it's in the TIP, which is your 4-year document, or if it's going to be in the regional transportation plan, which is your 30-year document. So we are discussing it, and one of the things that CAMPO also does is we identify these issues or these areas that projects are needed, and then we continue to work with NDOT. We get to look at their process, which is really great, and have those open, transparent discussions on, all right, how is this project ranking with other projects and other priorities that NDOT has? So we are talking quite a bit.
Well, this gives you, I guess, a pretty fancy baseline, but it's not an easy one. But it helps work with them to move forward with priorities with projects and money. Right?
Yeah, correct.
Is there any other questions?
Yeah, Mark, I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah, Chaz, you're fine.
I was just curious, is this just infrastructure projects or does it include other things, you know, computer system upgrades or whatever?
That's a really good question. The asset management we haven't yet taken that leap into structures, some of the other assets that we need to operate in terms of our business side. We do have a TAMP, which is our Transportation Asset Management Plan. That's not really addressing more or less the structures or the systems within NDOT that help us do this. So that's something we should potentially do. I'd like to get good at just really vetting our projects, so we're working on the priority that's going to get us the most bang for our buck in terms of some of those goal areas. Ultimately, you know, and I'm sure Sandra's going to bring this up, but really what we're trying to do is prioritize projects so we're meeting those goal areas, but ultimately to help move our performance in terms of the performance measures we've set up. So we're going to say, okay, this project's going to do A, B, and C. And we put it out, and then once it's out, we can start seeing how it's changed that measure, that performance in terms of safety, and then start working back to refine the type of criteria we may be assigning to certain types of improvement. But to your point, we have not yet looked at prioritizing or helping understand priority within NDOT resource assets or the business side of it, I suppose.
Thanks.
Any other?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
this is Sandra. Just to add to that, and Chaz, I'm not sure exactly what type of things you're asking for there. We're not yet using it for prioritizing studies, but as Kevin showed the slide with like almost a funnel, the next piece of this, we're really focused on the current pool of projects, which is primarily infrastructure. The next year or so, we're going to be focused on what are those needs? What do we need to study further? What do we need to identify potential solutions on? Ideally, the goal is to have this prioritize all of our resource allocations, but that's going to take some time to get there. But the other goal in the interim is to be more transparent, more defensible. We're going through, I've gotten multiple questions today as the special session is occurring on various different funding scenarios and what projects do we cut if we have this percentage cut or we can't bond or the GST goes to the general fund. That was the call I just got during Kevin's presentation. And this tool we've built allows us to quickly look at what are our lower priority projects, what is the federal fund sources, like what could we delay, what can't we delay, eventually what we want to get to, what's the impact of those potential either accelerations or slowing down of projects on our performance. We've made huge strides this year in that transparency and linking it to performance, but we still have a ways to go. It's going to take a few years before we really have that full linkage of system needs all the way down to identified projects and resources. And we are working very closely with all of the MPOs, including CAMPO, who sits on our PEG, Planning Executive Group, which serves as sort of the technical committee for this whole process. So we really appreciate that MPO perspective as well as the statewide perspective.
Thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Seeing none, it's a non-action item, so we'll bring it back and we're on item 6B. For information only, presentation, discussion of survey results collected to inform development of CAMPO's 2050 Regional Transportation Plan. Kelly, I know Kelly looked at you, I thought, oops.
All right, thank you. Can you hear me? That's I'm here to talk about the 2050 Regional Transportation Plan survey results. To get feedback from citizens within the CAMPO area about what their priorities are for regional transportation plans. The software used for this survey was SurveyMonkey. It was open from April 28th through June 9th. We advertised with many different outfits to get the word out about the survey. And we had 136 completed surveys, including one in Spanish. Compared to the 2040 survey, we had 153 completed surveys in the 2040 RTP survey. So the first question we asked in the survey was, how do you typically travel? Overwhelmingly, 90% travel by vehicle. The next majority is by bicycle, with 8%. We compared the results of this question of how do you typically travel with the 2040 RTP responses to understand changes between 4 years ago and today. What we see is a slight decrease in use in personal vehicles by 2%, and an increase in bicycle usage from 3.4% in 2040 to 8.1%. Which is a pretty big jump in typical travel. You'll also notice in these two comparisons that within the 2050 RTP responses, we did not get very many people who rode the bus. We consider the transit survey that staff did recently to cover transit ridership and needs very well. So that's a minor issue in this survey. Next slide. How far is your commute to work or school? What you'll see here is about a third of survey participants live less than 5 miles from their work. So live and work in the Campo area. About a third live 5 miles or more or work from home. And a third of survey participants are either not in school or in the workforce, which could be attributed to either retired community or capture unemployment at this time during the shutdown. Remember that the survey was given between April 28th and June 9th. So I want to concentrate, though, on this 1 to 5 miles, the 31.6%. This is an opportunity within our active transportation planning to plan infrastructure to support those people that live and work in this area so that they can use alternate modes of transportation other than a vehicle. And it's a third of the survey participants. So it could be a large population that would be benefiting from that. Next slide, please. About 75% of survey participants believe that the local and regional transportation system impacts their quality of life. So transportation is important, transportation modes and systems is important, and they would take notice of it. Next slide. How satisfied are you with the following aspects of transportation? You'll find a more detailed table in your handout than the one that's shown on the slide here. But this is shown to point out that the highest satisfaction areas are ease of travel by car, flow of traffic. People can get around easily here, and they like being able to get from here to there without too many backups or slowdowns. And then people are most dissatisfied with speeding traffic on neighborhood streets and driver behavior. And also conditions of sidewalks and conditions of roadways, people are somewhat dissatisfied with. So this ease of travel by car and the flow of traffic and this ease of getting around the Campo area, that would be important for staff to prioritize the maintenance of keeping streets easily maneuverable. And we can work on the condition of sidewalks and the conditions of roadways and work with the sheriff's office in partnership to work on speeding traffic and driver behavior. This next slide is a word cloud, and it identifies the words that were primarily used when participants were asked to use 3 words or phrases that represent their vision for the regional transportation system. The words that stick out to me are bicycle, pedestrian, maintenance, walking, streets, traffic. So this is a very interesting graphic to view and to think about as far as how the public views regional transportation system and what they think about when they think about regional transportation system and what they would like. This word cloud, and I'll reiterate this at the end of the presentation as well, this word cloud reflects the goals that staff have concentrated on for the 2050 RTP, and I'll outline those again at the end of the presentation. Next slide. So within the last 5 years, compared now to 5 years ago, when asked how often do you take the bus, about 60%, it's about the same as they did before, about the same or less often. But this is interesting because you'll see that even though the survey participants for the 2050 RTP survey did not regularly travel by bus, their sentiments are supportive of transportation, of bus transportation. So how often do they take the bus? How often are you driving? About 60%, about the same, and 26% are driving less often than they were 5 years ago. And to accompany that, people are biking a little bit more. 30% more are biking than they were about 5 years ago within the survey participants. And how often are you walking? 41% of people said that they're walking more often now compared to 5 years ago. This next slide is very important because what it demonstrates is that 3/4 of survey participants would support an increased gas tax or transportation fee to be used for local road repairs. Next slide, okay. So this slide, this table, is what is the most important improvement that can be made to the transportation system. So these are the improvements that survey respondents would like to see improved. And the top 3 are roadway maintenance, add and expand on-street bicycle lanes, and expand and improve transit system. And we also see that there's a find a new revenue source. There's a support to find new revenue sources to support transportation. Complete the I-580 interchange. A lot of the responses to this question, and this is another question where you'll find a more detailed table in your packet. There are a lot of recurring themes between the same question that was asked in the 2040 RTP survey and this one. And those include completing the freeway, roadway repair, lighting, improve connectivity for bikers and walkers, complete the freeway with overpass, maintaining existing roadways, expand the bus service, leave downtown alone. So these are the sentiments that were outlined within the 2050 or the 2050 RTP survey. Okay. Here we have a map of where people live who took the survey, and then where they work. Most people live in Carson City. There's some from Douglas and Reno, and then they work in Carson City, Reno, Douglas. There's one person who completed the survey that works in Elko. So a variety of different participants. The age range is mostly from 55 to 74. More than 50% of the participants were age 55 to 74. And I just wanted to reiterate the goals for the 2050 RTP, which staff has found the results of the survey support these goals, which are increase the safety of the transportation system for all users, maintain a sustainable regional transportation system, increase the mobility and reliability of the transportation system for all users, maintain and develop a multimodal transportation system that supports economic vitality, and provide an integrated transportation system. Okay, thank you.
You're supposed to say ta-da or something. Are there any
That's all.
questions?
Thank you.
It's okay.
Questions, happily accepted.
Any questions? Seeing none, guess I thank you for your presentation. And that was for information only, so no action. So we move on to the next item on the agenda, which is board comments. I'll start here, I guess, and then move out. Brad? Greg? Lucia? You're not on the board, but you can make a comment if you want.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. I did want to announce that we conducted a public open house. It was a open house format in the community center last Monday. It was semi-poorly attended, but there were some stakeholders there, and we appreciated their input. Staff did a good job putting it together. Additionally, there'll be 2 virtual workshops held to gain additional input for the RTP. Those are scheduled for next Tuesday and next Wednesday. If there are members of the public or the board that have not yet received an invitation for those virtual workshops, please reach out to Dirk Goring or myself, and we'll get you added to those. So we're looking forward to incorporating the public comment we receive, and thanks for the opportunity to announce those.
You bet. John, any comment? No, I see you shaking your head. Sandra? Any more last comment?
Yeah, just, I can't remember if Kevin or I mentioned it during his presentation, but our 2021 annual work program and 2021 through 2024 STIP is currently out for public comment. I'll be doing a presentation on it to our board on Monday, and then we'll bring it back in August for approval, although with the budget situation, everything's a little bit up in the air, so I don't know if we'll be able to approve in August or have to make additional changes and additional comments, but given the work we've done in integrating the One Nevada plan into the STIP process, we'd appreciate you guys taking a look and giving us comments, even if we know that the electronic STIP platform needs some work, so whether it's specific questions on the project or on the platform or the communication or anything like that, we'd appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Sure, and Sandra, I wish you good luck with the session going into place here in a very quick period of time, but it's never happened in history.
We might need it.
Yeah, I think so. Chaz, anything to say?
Yeah, I just had a question for Lucia. Next Tuesday and Wednesday's virtual meetings on the 2050 plan, are they the same? So you only have to go to one of them, or should someone go to both?
That's a great question. The content overview will be the same. The focus of them will be slightly different. The one on Wednesday, I believe, Dirk can correct me, will be a little bit more focused on non-motorized, and the one on Tuesday will be a little bit more focused on capital and roadway projects. Dirk, is that right?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Okay, we're back to here. The next meeting is on Wednesday, August 12th, here in this room. And there's one more chance for public comment. Is there any public comment?
There is no public comment,
All right,
Mr. Chair.
thank you. I ask for action to adjourn. So moved. Brad? Thank you. And we're going to start the next meeting at 5:15. Is that what you said? And we're adjourned. Thank you. everybody.
order this meeting of the Carson City Regional Transportation Commission. Today is Wednesday, June 8th, 2020. It is 5:18 p.m. Going to read into the record a disclosure on public comment limitations. Although the RTC often provides an opportunity for additional public comment during each specific item designated for possible action on the agenda, public comment will be temporarily limited to the beginning of the agenda before any action is taken, and again at the end before adjournment. This policy will remain effective during the period of time the state of Nevada is under a state of emergency as declared by the governor due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and is intended to achieve the efficient conduct of meetings while facilitating public participation via video conference and telephonic means. We are now on item number 1 on the agenda. Roll call, please, Tamar.
Chair Bankowski.
I'm here.
Vice Chair Kimbrough.
Here.
Commissioner Bagwell. Here. Commissioner McQuarrie.
Here.
Commissioner Stedfield. A quorum is present.
Thank you. We're now on agenda item 2, agenda management notice. Are there any changes to the agenda, Dirk?
No changes, Chair?
Any requested changes to the agenda by any of the commissioners? Seeing none, we'll move on to agenda item 3, disclosures. Any member of the RTC board have any disclosures tonight? I see shaking heads. Chaz, any disclosures? No? Okay. Thank you.
No.
We are now on agenda item 4, our initial public comment. Desi, is there anybody on the line for public comment?
I see no public comment, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We're now on agenda item 5, approval of the minutes.
I have a change on the minutes, just a minor change on
Go ahead.
60356. Vice Chair expressed concern. He clarified that a half-mile trail would not be available as they may be longer and that the restrooms would not smell. What I was trying to say, I don't know what I said, was that there's more than just a 1/2 mile trail. People keep thinking there's just a 1/2. There's more than, there were several trails that come out of that trailhead. So that's all, just to clarify that.
Any additional changes or corrections to the minutes? If not, I would entertain a motion.
I move to approve the minutes of June 10th, 2020 Regional Transportation Commission.
Second.
Any further discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. Vote is... Did I get you, Chaz?
That was an aye.
Okay, thank you. So the vote is 5-0.
Yes.
We're now on public meeting items. Okay. Item 6A, for information only, presentation and discussion of the 2019 Carson City downtown parking analysis. Lucia, I believe you're taking this?
I'm going to kick this off. Is Lee Plummel there?
He is.
Okay, great. So I'm going to turn it over to him in a minute. Just to give you a little background on this effort, it does represent a partnership between Public Works and the Community Development Departments. This effort was funded by the Regional Transportation Commission, but Lee Plummel and his group really took the lead in helping us understand, trends in parking downtown and helped us define the study area. From time to time, we do get public comment and inquiry regarding the effectiveness of our parking policies in Carson City. And so this is part of a series of efforts to really understand trends in usage and whether there's adequate parking downtown and whether we have the right policies. Carson City retained LSC transportation consultants. They conducted weekday parking counts within downtown in May 2019 when the legislature was in session, and then again in September of 2019 when there was no session. We also came back and did a turnover count where they collected the last couple digits of the license plates and determined how long folks were staying in their parking spaces to better understand whether the 2-hour parking policy is effective or needed. Just give us some insights on that. So with that background, I'll turn it over to Lee to give you the main dish of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, Lee Plummel, Community Development Director. And I'm going to give a pretty high-level overview of the downtown parking analysis report. Community development we have redevelopment, so we have the Citizens Committee and the Redevelopment Authority that's interested in the parking in this area and things going on here. I also have code enforcement, which does the parking enforcement. So they live the parking regulations on a daily basis. Lucia is our, she's the hearings officer. I don't know, forget the term exactly, but she's the administrative officer for the hearings for parking tickets. So she gets to do that. Public Works approves the 2-hour parking. They approve the special permits. So she's very familiar with what's going on downtown as well. And I've told her to jump in anytime she wants on this. And like I said, I'll give a high overview. And if you have some detailed questions, I'll probably get some help answering the questions. Go ahead, Dirk's going to advance this for me. I think that's a pretty good overview of it. So the study divided the downtown area. So the limits of the study are on the map up there, and it also divided it into sub areas for the purposes of some of the calculations. You have the central area, which is about from Musser to Robinson, and from Nevada Street over to Roop Street, and then some areas north to William Street, and the south area down to Fifth Street, which is really the core of what we call the downtown mixed-use district and where a lot of the downtown businesses are. Just a couple notes on here. The parking study, it includes all the on-street parking within that area. So that's all city parking, that's public parking, the parking lots that are noted on there. And then there's also some private lots that are open to the public that are included. Go ahead to the next one, Dirk. Thank you. It does not include the state property. So it's not an analysis of if there's enough parking for the legislature itself. They have their own parking, but certainly the counts were conducted intentionally. We wanted to make sure they were conducted during the legislature because that does have an impact on the parking within the business district. So we wanted to count that. And then counts were also done, and in fact, in a little more detail after the session last year. So within this area in total, there's about 1,400 total public parking spaces. And using that term, public parking spaces, we're also including about 300 spaces that are in private lots that are open to the public. Those are primarily owned by the Adams Foundation currently, and they are signed and open to the public, although it was pointed out that there are couple of those lots are not necessarily labeled. There's some no trespassing signs, in addition to public parking signs, which is a little bit of confusion. I'll work with them, but they are actively promoting for business employees to park there. They've talked to city offices and allowed employees to park there. So in terms of this count, it's still part of the inventory of what's available today in terms of what's available for public parking. And when those develop, they'll have to bring their own parking with them, and this whole thing will be reassessed. Also, in terms of the number of parking spaces, there's over 70% where there's no parking restrictions, and about 22% with the 2-hour limit. So the vast majority of the spaces within this area have no parking restrictions, and those where there are parking restrictions are limited to the certain areas where they're necessary, where the businesses are, and you want some turnover throughout the day to have some spaces available. Go ahead. And I've shown this in the past, and I found this graphic because I have a little bit of history. I have my copy here of the 2007 downtown parking study, which was more of a kind of a broad build-out scenario. It wasn't as detailed as this, but just for context here, when you're looking at these maps and seeing where there's areas where the parking segments of street are full and where it's available, this overlays the Walmart property onto the downtown. So the Walmart property, it's a little smaller than the entire downtown core area, but it goes Similarly, from one end of the property, it's about from Musser to almost Robinson, with the parking lot being half of that. So just as you look at these and how far parking is available away, if you kind of think of it in this context, you frequently park a block away if Walmart's busy, and you walk a block inside the building to get to where you're going. So it's not terribly unusual that people are walking that far. We have pretty small blocks relative to other cities too. We have pretty small blocks in Carson City. Derek? Okay, so getting to some of the results here. This is a graph showing with the bars there are the parking spaces that are occupied at, I printed mine really small here, at various times during the day, on average, with the blue line at the top being the total number of parking spaces on public property. I believe then the upper line, which you should have labeled there, is the total spaces that include the parking spaces on private property that are allowed to be used now. So currently, and I think as we get into go ahead, Dirk, I think as we get into some of the numbers, you can see the percentages, the maximum occupancy there's still capacity. Overall, those graphs were just overall for the whole area. Now this zeroes down. This was their analysis based on individual segments and the percentage of occupancy at different times during the day. So again, it's kind of a heat map. So red means it was fully occupied. So this is where sometimes of the day you may not be able to find a parking space. And then going down to green where there's a higher percentage available. So again, certainly we knew this, and I think, we hear that there's not parking available, and there's often not parking spaces available in any particular 170-foot street segment that we have in the downtown. But as this shows, and I think as the study showed in general, there's generally parking spaces available now in the vicinity. And as I mentioned before, some of that is still, we've been working over the last year, even since this was conducted with some of the businesses, to try to direct some of the employees to parking lots that are a couple blocks away to free up those spaces that are right in front of the businesses. And it's admitted by the businesses that their employees are taking up a lot of the spaces that are in front of the businesses. Any questions on? I think there's only one or two more on this, but on this heat map, to understand that. Okay, Dirk. Yeah, I think, and this slide does wrap up the presentation. Then we'll get to questions. So again, peak utilization. The graph that was there showed the peak utilization throughout the whole area. Now, obviously, somebody that's over by McFadden Plaza is not going to park up by William Street and walk down there. But then on the second bullet here is where it's broken down by area. And probably as expected, you have the southern area, which is a smaller area right next to the legislature building, right next to McFadden Plaza. So it does experience a higher occupancy, particularly during the legislature. So again, on that slide there, you have May, which was May 2019, which was during the legislative session, and then September when it wasn't. And, we have that 4 to 6 months out of the year when more spaces are occupied in that area, and then it drops down in September. And the central area, as expected, is where the most usage is consistently, both during the legislature and not during the legislature, but again, still with capacity and spaces available. And there's other recommendations up there, about 2-hour spaces, and I could just tell you that we've, again, the requests come to us are considered by Lucia and Public Works, and we've used this study once to come to conclusions. We take recommendations and requests from various property owners about where either to add 2-hour parking or remove 2-hour parking. So that's always a consideration. And that's all I wanted to share with this. We'd be available for questions unless Lucia has anything to add. No. Thank you.
Any questions from the board members? Any questions, Chaz?
I would just comment that it seems like we have adequate parking downtown. So,
Yes, I would agree. I think we all knew that, but it's nice to see it documented. Good presentation, Lee. No questions. Thank you very much. That was a non-action item. So we will move on to agenda item. What do I do with my agenda? I lost. No, I know it's 6B, but I lost my agenda. So we're going to move on to 6B. And great, thank you. For possible action, discussion and possible action regarding a determination that Coons Construction LLC is the lowest responsive and responsible bidder pursuant to NRS Chapter 338 and to award contract number 2030-0007 CDBG Airport Road ADA Improvement Project to Coons Construction LLC for a total not to exceed amount of $177,619.20 to be funded from the Community Development Block Grant Fund Capital Improvement Account. And Chris, this one's yours.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Chris Martinovich, Transportation Traffic Engineer for the record. So this is, yes, to award a construction contract to Coons Construction for the Airport Road CDBG ADA Improvement Project. A lot of acronyms there. It's really to construct some sidewalk and improve ADA accessibility along Airport Road near William Street and up toward Champion Way, north of the shopping center there. And so there's some sidewalk improvements, ADA improvements on kind of both sides of the road. And so that'll be ongoing with this project. We are going to coordinate this project with the other Airport Road sewer job, which is on the other side of William Street. So that will coordinate the timing of the two projects so that we don't have all these closures and detours going on in the same area. So we're certainly aware of that. With that, don't have any other items, so I'll be happy to take any questions on this.
Any questions for Chris? Seeing none, then I'll bring this back to the board for a motion.
I move to award contract number 203-000007 as presented.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing and seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. The vote is unanimous, 5-0. Thank you. We'll move on to agenda item 6C for information only, information and presentation on the Southwest Carson Circulation Study. Lauren.
I'm going to tee this one up, Mr. Chair. This is Lucia Maloney. As you know, South Carson Street construction project is ongoing. This effort right here tonight was initiated after some stakeholder comment inquiring about, what's going to happen after the project. Is there going to be traffic on Curry Street or Silver Sage? And tell us about whether we can optimize those routes or make any improvements in the kind of post South Carson Street project scenario. So that's kind of where this was born. It was funded by the Redevelopment Authority Citizens Committee. So it's a RAC initiated project. We're looking tonight to get any technical comments or feedback from this body, and then this report will also be presented to the RAC at their August 3rd meeting. There was a couple of purposes for the study. One I mentioned on the parallel routes, but also we wanted to create and illustrate alignment options for a potential realignment of Snyder Avenue to Appian Way. As you know, we've started collecting pro rata contribution from developments down there, and we wanted to understand a potential alignment or opportunities and challenges associated with that future project. So that was an additional component of this effort. So 2 reports were prepared by the consultant Headway, and Lauren's here this evening, and he'll present the details on the results. Thanks, Lauren.
You bet. Thank you for the introduction. Is my microphone working well enough? All right. Dirk, I'll warn you, there's a couple extra clicks in some of those slides at the beginning, so just heads up on that. So go ahead. Thank you. So as Lucia mentioned, there's several aspects of this study that I want to highlight. I'm going to take a pretty high level on this one as well, about 10 minutes, and be available for lots of questions if you have them. But in short, there's a lot going on in the southwest portion of Carson City with the Carson City Complete Streets Improvement Project that's underway right now. A number of developments that have been approved while they're not under construction. They are entitled, and you've seen in different ways a number of those over the last 2 years. There's a lot of activity, and so as Lucia mentioned, what does all this mean when we put it together, all these moving parts? And should we be doing something in addition to, or as a supplement to, or as an enhancement to the Carson City's, or the Carson Street improvements? And so that's really what we're about. We're going to cover really two primary areas in this one. That is, what should we do with Snyder-Appian area and an alignment that has long been contemplated but not well defined? And so tonight we're going to talk about how we've defined what we believe is the appropriate thing to do there. And then secondarily, what about these routes that are parallel to Carson Street? So Curry and Cochise run the full length from Roland all the way to Fifth Street effectively, as does Roop and Silver Sage run that full segment too. They are parallel, they're a block or two away. How do those interact with South Carson Street? So that's really what we're after, is identifying some big picture circulation enhancements that fit everything together. So just a little bit of background, I've touched on it, but of course the Complete Streets Project, as I've referred to it, if you have another name you'd like me to use, I'm happy to, but I know it as the Complete Streets Project enhancement, is full underway at this point, and we recognize that back when we worked on the South Carson Street evaluation that was in support of that project. At that time, we completed, this was around May of 2019, a very detailed analysis for South Carson Street, which included 14 intersections or so, as I recall, and defined what needed to happen with that project. At that time, and in those volumes that were developed through that study, we identified the 6 projects in the Clearview, Cochise, Appian area that were under entitlement, all of which have been approved, to my knowledge. And all of those projects' traffic volumes were included in that study. And since we're using that study as the basis for this study, again, they're all included, including North Douglas County Specific Plan, which is a large project just south of the city in Douglas County that are shown there. It does affect South Carson Street a lot more than it would the parallel routes, but it does have an effect, and so I just note it. Through that analysis, we identified lane configurations and the recommendations for coordinated signals and many other things that we talked about in previous meetings, so I won't rehash that. But just know that everything we're doing tonight is built off of that same study. So let's talk about the first of the two main topic areas, which is the Snyder Avenue, Appian, Overland area. The purpose here is to conduct an alternatives analysis to vet a variety of options for improvement, some signals, some without, some different realignments. What if we signalized Snyder and Overland exactly where they are, or is it West Appian more appropriate? And how should we go about that in an objective and logical way? Well, that's through a screening process, an alternatives analysis process, and that's what I'm going to walk you through. As you'll see coming up, we had to use something to initially vet a number of options. And what we used were these primary goals, or the initial screening criteria. If you go back one, please, Dirk. Thank you. You were anticipating well, but I'm not quite there. These are the primary goals or screening criteria that we used initially. So recall that Fire Station 53's on Snyder at Oak. It's very difficult today to get out onto Carson Street without a signal. Fire station or fire truck drivers can go up to Clearview, but that's out of direction if you're headed south, right? So one of the criteria is, can we improve emergency response time? Another is signalizing a new intersection on South Carson Street, recognizing there's a number of streets that are not signalized, but that need improved access, particularly given the 6 private developments entitled that I've mentioned here. And then we want to generally improve left turns to and from South Carson Street to those number of streets, right? We have Appian, Overland, in particular, and Snyder. And we want to generally improve access to this growing, redeveloping area. So those are kind of the key criteria in the first screening items now. So the process is this initial screening against those 5 goals that I just mentioned. And are there any fatal flaws when we look at initial concepts, of which we looked at 11, and we'll show you coming up here in just a minute. But we looked at 11 alternatives, looked at, are there any fatal flaws, and do they meet those goals? And how many of those goals that I've just mentioned do they actually meet? And so that was the first screening level. After that, we went to a secondary screening level where 5 of those 11 moved forward. And at that point, we looked at traffic operations, which is level of service, delay, queuing. How well does this actually work with different scenarios? What are the right-of-way impacts? Does this really improve access, and for whom? Or is it for actually a lot of private entities, which is the more the better when we're improving access, because there's a high cost of transportation improvements, as we all know. So are we getting a bang for the buck out of this? What is the construction cost? Is it reasonable or extremely high? And then after we went through that process for all 5 alternatives that were, the secondary list, we narrowed that to really 2. And those are what I'm going to hit on coming up. So let's see the screening criteria. Again, on the left is the table of 11, the initial screening. On the right is the detailed screening of 5 alternatives. And you say, yeah, but Lauren, there's 10 there, and you're right. But 5 of them are in option number 2. They're grouped. And all of those in that category include a traffic signal at West Appian and South Carson. They do it in slightly different ways, but they're really all in the same vein. And then the others are different. So I won't go into a ton of detail. We could go on for hours on this, I think, but no need. At the end of the day, it became, at least in our minds, pretty obvious that signalizing West Appian at the West Appian location and realigning Snyder Avenue to that location, while a little circuitous, a little complex, truly is the best alternative in the big picture here. And so I'll show you the 2, why it's really one alternative, but 2 parts, and I'll show you that and why we recommend that. So here it is. This is the grand recommendation. It is to, again, signalize West Appian and wrap Snyder around the Carson Lanes property and Aloha Liquor property onto what's the frontage road today, and wrap that back in so that we get one signalized location in the most appropriate spot on the South Carson corridor, okay? Overland Snyder, as it sits today, is a little closer to Clearview than we would like. Roland is a little too close to NDOT's facilities and the interchange and doesn't serve the properties as well and where development's occurring. If you look at the traffic counts from what's developing, the vast majority of that is actually on Appian, and it just pretty clearly speaks to signalizing Appian, at least in my mind. So there are a couple complexities here I do need to point out to you. One is the frontage road south of the very sharp curve there still comes in to that curve. Quite frankly, I don't love that. But it's part of the situation we have right now, and I'll give you a couple ways that maybe we can deal with that, and I'm saying maybe. But we have a number of driveways right there with the apartment complex, the frontage road, that curve in the road, and of course the Carson Lane, which is a little bit easier to deal with because our driveways can be further north. But just keep that in mind. But bearing all things, this is still a better alternative than all the others we looked at, and there's a long list of that, kind of 11 down in the appendix of the report if you really want to dig in. Next slide, please. Recognizing that driveway challenge on the frontage road, we said, well, is there anything else we could do with that to get the driveway off of that curve and immediately out of the signalized area? And we came up with a concept of what I'll call a 3/4 mini roundabout. This can fit. Yes, it's close to the signal, but it deals with driveways better than the previous option. There is a cost to that, though. Adding this mini roundabout in round numbers we're talking about maybe an extra $900,000, $1 million, something like that. And a lot of coordination with property owners and issues that come along with that. But the frontage road driveway is a challenge. So this is potentially one way to address that, and I'll hit another one later at the end of the presentation. So again, this would have the same realignment of Snyder around the bowling alley as you saw on the previous slide. This change is just the treatment right at the connection. Okay, I'll move on. The other aspect of this study is the parallel corridors, Cochise, Curry, and then Roop and Silver Sage. So again, what can we do in the big picture to mesh all of this together? Should we be looking at improvements on these parallel corridors? And to determine that, we studied an additional 10 intersections, listed all out there, and you can barely see the dots, but where you see a numbered dot in the aerial photos, the intersections that were studied. So the major ones all up and down through both corridors. Through that analysis and the previous Carson report, I want to make it pretty clear that we do not expect any significant volume of traffic to move from South Carson to either of these parallel routes, except potentially north of Stewart Street. The reason is there's only one lane northbound, north of Stewart, and so some traffic may choose to divert, particularly in the northbound direction, over to Stewart. We don't see that as being an issue. It's a 4-lane road. It's got a lot of capacity. We knew that going in, and we talked about that before. So with that caveat that some traffic may move to Stewart, we really don't believe any substantial amounts moving to either Curry, Cochise, or Silver Sage and Roop. Now, that doesn't mean that it couldn't. There's certainly capacity there. There's a lot of remaining capacity, in fact, on those roadways. And if some vehicles choose to move over there, it's not a significant issue. The analysis showed that everything is well within level service policy in the 2040 timeframe, and we did not identify any issues at any of those major intersections. We did note that Curry and Cochise are more commercial in nature, generally speaking, and if we were going to encourage or make improvements that might encourage traffic to divert, encouraging that to happen more to Curry and Cochise would be better than Silver Sage and Roop because they're more residential in nature. And then finally on this slide, it would be important to make good linkages between Carson Street and Curry, being the more commercial, being where the development's occurring, Carson Hills Apartments going over there. And if you look at the roadway network, there really aren't very many high-quality connections between the two routes. You have Clearview, you have Kuntz, but Rhodes is not signalized, so that can be hard to get from Curry back onto Carson Street. And then you don't really have another true connection until you get to 5th Street. So this leads to some recommendations. I'll just run through these. These are the crux of the second study that we performed, the second part of it. So speaking of these extensions, we're suggesting that Stewart Street be connected as a 2-lane roadway from Carson over to Curry. That links up that north section where there's really no connection back and forth. Some details of that need to be worked out, but generally speaking, it's a good circulation improvement. Along with that, this is along the lines of encouraging some traffic, or at least accommodating traffic that has already been approved through development on Curry Street. Some striping and pavement maintenance would be in order to bring it up to a little higher standard for additional traffic. We think changing the speed limit in the southern portion where it's 25, 30 might be more appropriate in some of those instances, particularly where it's more commercial in nature. And maybe the 35 on the high end's a little bit high. So a relook at the speed limit. Similarly, we could look at going to 2-way stop control instead of 4-way stop at Kuntz and Cochise, Curry. There's no reason to have all-way stop controls that simply delay traffic if you're trying to give better options and higher speed circulation, as was noted in some of the comments from your RTP survey. And I already noted the traffic signal at Appian and Snyder and that realignment. That's absolutely key. That's probably the most important recommendation out of this entire study. Back to the connections, roads at Carson, we believe should be signalized at some point. That probably comes, quite frankly, with redevelopment of the Armory site. That's most likely where it's going to get funded and when the need really arrives. But that's another way to make a good connection between the two routes. And then finally, Oak Street today, in the south portion between Snyder and Clearview, is a little bit awkward. The street width is narrow, people back into it. There's some pretty deep valley gutters, and there's just some aspects of it that make it not a through route, if you will. But it has potential to be one and to serve that neighborhood a lot better. And so we've suggested maybe that be looked at. Again, not a huge demand for that, but it could certainly be better. And finally, this goes back to the frontage road connection to the curve with the realignment. Another option for that entire situation would be to collaborate with the property owners. There's 2 parcels on the far south end of the frontage road that are next to NDOT's drainage basin. They're not landlocked, but access challenged. If the city would collaborate to potentially help those property owners get access to Oak instead, that might be of benefit overall in potentially removing the frontage road or at least lessening the amount of traffic on it and using Oak Street instead. So that would be one other way to deal with the driveway connection concern that we have. So that's the highlights, and I'm happy to take questions on any of it.
Anybody have questions? Go ahead, Mark.
I just have a comment, and thank you. I really was appreciative of the fact how easily you broke this down into something understandable.
We try.
It was the 2 alternatives and whittled down to that with a nice chart that explains very thoroughly. So I just wanted to compliment you on your efforts to make this as easy to show the public or ourselves the solutions to these problems that we have down there. So thank you.
Thank you.
Chaz, any questions?
Yeah, I do. I thought they were good reports, Lauren. I did note, though, that in the parallel route assessment, that you list some improvements, and it's on page 1 under the executive summary, that are a whole range of things, most of which you mentioned just now. One thing that is not mentioned, though, is the fact that Curry Street between the Stewart connection and Rhodes is really narrow with 2 nasty bends, and it's used by a lot of bicyclists, even though it's a really terrible bike route. So I think that as part of this corridor, improving that should be listed as a goal or one of the items to be considered, especially since the 2050 draft bicycle plan shows bike lanes being added to this section of Curry Street. So I would like to see that included as a recommended improvement in the report. That was the first thing.
Maybe Chaz, maybe I take a shot at that one while you're looking for your second question.
Yeah.
I understand that section of roadway is somewhat challenged with width and right-of-way and easement and maybe even a lease agreement with the city. So I fully understand your comment. I think you're right. I simply wish to point out that might be a challenge to widen that roadway there. And I think Lucia can speak to that more than I can, or perhaps Dirk, but I've absolutely taken your comment into effect, and I'm happy to modify the report as such, as long as it's reasonable to widen given the legal status.
Dirk Warren for the record. One thing to note is that enhancements to Curry Street in this section was identified as a project in the 2040 RTP and is also identified as a proposed project for the 2050 RTP. And we did note with the project list that we'll be talking about soon, we did mention this study as it addresses the circulation for south for this corridor.
So if it is included in the 2040 and 2050 tips, then there should not be a problem with including it in the report?
That's correct. We can discuss it and look at adding it. Thank you, Chaz.
Yeah, it will then be consistent with all the reports and studies that we've got for this area. And I've been in Carson City for 32 years, I think 31 years ago, I was asked to look at widening this piece of Curry Street. And there are challenges for sure, but they're not insurmountable, I don't think. And even if you don't get a full bike lane, which would certainly be the goal, even just adding 2 or 3 feet of pavement on either side would make it a lot safer. So that was that. And then, and this is really the same thing, but it's mentioned again, this piece of Curry Street on page 8 of your report, future conditions under roadway modifications. And the first bullet is Curry Street from Rhodes to Lake Glen, enhancements to 2-lane road. I mean, it was just another opportunity to point out that bike lanes could be part of that enhancement.
We may have to pull up your old plans, Chaz, but we'll take this back and look at adding it to be consistent. That's a great comment. Thank you.
Okay. And then, well, the other comments are just sort of similar. They're about the same piece of Curry Street, but on page 14, under recommendations, north-south circulation improvements, the second paragraph starts off, it is recommended that north-south circulation be encouraged on Curry Street, which is just another reason to include it since it's in the plans. So that was all I had. I thought the report was good. Thanks.
Thank you, and we're happy to make the addition.
And I have a couple of questions as well. First for you, Lauren, how many cars can queue on the mini roundabout?
So the mini roundabout, let's go back to that slide, if please, Dirk. One thing that we're doing here, and I'll get directly to your question in a second. One thing we're doing here, and the reason it's 3/4, is so that cars cannot queue in funny directions past the inbound or cannot cross through the inbound direction. We don't want that conflict. And so note that you cannot go southbound all the way through that roundabout, right? But queuing is a concern and is a consideration here. There's nothing that would stop vehicles from leaving the signal, entering the roundabout, and heading north or into either of those driveways. There's no impediment, if you will. However, if the apartments were to come out in mass, they could begin to block that part of the roundabout, and so it does become a concern. At this point, you could sit about 4 to 5 vehicles at the signal, back into the roundabout before you begin to block any of the frontage road movement. So a total of 8 if you're looking at both lanes. But yes, your comment is very valid. There is a limited amount of storage, and that is a concern.
So if I understand you correctly, eastbound traffic turning on to what would now be East Appian can do full movements. They can go south on the frontage road, they can go into the apartment complex, or they can go north on the frontage road. But if you're going south on the frontage road from Snyder, you're dead ending at the roundabout and you have to turn at the traffic light. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
And that is because we do not want a conflict of southbound traffic immediately adjacent to the signal.
Okay. And my second question is for staff, and that is the improvements on the summary of improvements on page 15 to 16 on the parallel route assessment. These improvements, will we price them out? Will we do engineers' estimates for pro rata shares for future development? Because I believe that one of the points of doing this study was so that we understood what improvements were necessary to circulate traffic, so that we would be aware when projects came in front of the Planning Commission and the board for approval, that we knew what conditions to put on those projects.
This is Lucia Maloney. That's exactly right, Supervisor. This will serve that need. It'll serve as inputs to the regional transportation plan. And frankly, we'll be able to start funding these, as we come through with the district projects and making them a priority now that they're included in this report.
So will they be fleshed out a little more too, so that instead of just saying striping improvements, it will actually detail where and how much striping is required?
That's exactly right. We have a fantastic traffic engineer in-house now that helps us with some of these littler, and we will start working them as funding permits to flush them out.
Great. That was it for me. Any last chance for questions?
Yeah, just one final thing there, Brad. I guess the Curry Street bike lane should be added to the summary of improvements on page 16 too. Just to be consistent with the front end. That was it for me.
So I think staff will go through the report and add it where appropriate.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
All right. This was a non-action item, so last call for questions, so we'll move on. I see no additional questions, so thank you, Lauren, for the presentation and the reports. It's very detailed and very helpful information. I'm glad that we have this. It's going to be a really valuable tool for us moving forward. So we are now on item 6D for information only. Presentation and discussion of the draft Carson City Safe Routes to Schools Master Plan. And Kelly, I guess you're going to start this, and then Cole will give the presentation. Is that correct?
Yes.
Great. Go ahead.
Thank you. Kelly Norman, Transportation Planner Analyst and the Western Nevada Safe Routes to School Coordinator. The Carson City Safe Routes to School Master Plan is nearing completion. The draft master plan was sent to the Carson City School Board, all 8 Carson City school principals that were involved in the master plan, and the Washoe Tribe to solicit comments on the plan. Headway and Carson City Public Works will present at the Carson City School Board meeting on Tuesday, July 14th. And a final version of the Carson City Safe Routes to School Master Plan will be brought back to the RTC in September of 2020. The Carson City Safe Routes to School Master Plan process kicked off in September of 2019 with observations of and consultations with all 8 elementary and middle schools in Carson City. Headway Transportation, Alta Planning, Carson City School District, and Carson City Public Works have worked together to contribute to this document. Western Nevada Safe Routes to School provided funds to pay for the master plan. The master plan is designed for each Carson City school to easily reference programmatic and engineering safety recommendations for their particular schools. Programmatic recommendations from the master plan will be incorporated into the Western Nevada Safe Routes to School program. Engineering recommendations will be incorporated into the 2050 Regional Transportation Plan. Children and students make up a large portion of the bike and pedestrian network in Carson City. The Carson City Safe Routes to School master plan will serve as a guide to improving the bike and pedestrian network across Carson City, benefiting all active transportation users. And without further ado, please welcome Cole Pfeiffer and Sam Corbett, who will be presenting tonight.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. We're excited to speak to you tonight about the Safe Routes to School plan we've been working on for some months, and excited to get some feedback from you all. So we'll jump in, and Dirk, I apologize for my numerous clicks that you're going to have to go on the slides here. So let's go to the next slide.
Cole, is there any chance that you can move your microphone just a little bit closer? We're having a little trouble hearing you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Is that a little bit better?
That is better. Thank you.
Better? Okay. Excellent. So we'll jump in to the first slide. There we go. Okay. And as far as where this plan fits in the overall process, Kelly really touched on that already. It's going to be pulled into the regional transportation plan. I should form that document, and then, as she mentioned, although it does focus on improving safety for bicyclists and pedestrians, it does provide a benefit to any walking and biking users of the transportation network, which is certainly important for all users, but as well as the senior population in Carson. So it provides benefits beyond just the primary goal. The goal there, you see, focused on a 1 mile radius around all public elementary and middle schools in Carson. And then we also expanded that to focus on bus stop locations. After meeting with school staff, we heard that that was an issue for students, is actually accessing bus stops. So we wanted to look at that as well. This project followed the typical Safe Routes to School planning formula. It focuses on the 6 E's, to really 6 different categories to ensure that the final resulting program is a holistic program of projects, not only your engineering projects, but also strategies to help encourage students to walk and bike, show them that it's fun, provide some education and engagement with law enforcement, and then baking in equity throughout the entire program to ensure that it's implemented in an equitable way, and then evaluation just to ensure that the program is having an effect that you're. Next slide. Okay. Click next. There you go. As Kelly mentioned, the first, what we did, the process of actually putting the plan together, met with all of the principals and some staff from all 8 schools involved in the project to pick their brains a little bit about some safety concerns that they know about and primary things. Can you go back just 1 or 2 clicks, sir? That's perfect. We conducted in-person observations of the pickup and drop-off periods to observe walking and biking conflicts. We did that both in person, and then we also used an aerial drone to give us a bird's eye view, a bird's eye perspective of those conflict points, and then circulation as well. We looked at, we analyzed some relevant data, including historical crash data for bikes and peds surrounding schools, and really focused in on crash data during the time that kids would be walking and biking to school primarily. And we incorporated some vehicle speed data that was collected on major roadways around the area that kids would be crossing, and then focused on bus routes and bus stop locations as well after incorporating that into the process. One of the most insightful things from the project was conducting the parent and student surveys. We conducted a survey of parents with students at all elementary and middle schools, and then a survey of the middle school students at Carson and the Valley. Can we hit next, Dirk? What the best insight from that, we got a lot of feedback from that, but what they both surveys agreed on were the 3 major focus areas of the project. They identified the safety of intersections and crossings, the presence and condition of sidewalks and pathways, and then the speed of vehicles along their routes to school as the 3 biggest issues affecting either the parents' decision to allow their kids to walk or bike to school, or affecting the kids' decision themselves to walk and bike to school. So those became our major 3 focus areas, wanting to improve those safety of intersections and crossings, improve sidewalks and pathways, and then reduce traffic speeds along the routes to school. Next. You can click through these, yeah. This is the process that we went through, that's the last one. Process that we went through to develop the recommendations now that we had gotten our existing conditions. We wanted to analyze, as I said, the biking and walking network within a mile of each school and identify what the major walking biking destinations are, either a neighborhood or after school, a primary destination, for example, for middle school students is Dutch Brothers Coffee House. We wanted to identify where students are going before and after school, and then focus on improving the walking and biking routes, those primary walking and biking routes. And working outward from campus was a major focus of ours. We wanted to draw our focus towards the area of the transportation network where the highest number of students are walking, and that is around the school, and then work out. As we were developing recommendations, we wanted to address not only those 3 focus areas, but as well as specific safety issues that were identified through the survey. We had some of those identified through the comments. And then we also wanted to reduce walking and biking distances where possible. It's kind of a hard thing for Safe Routes to School plan to reduce walking distances, but in some areas there's some network connections that we can make that would significantly reduce some walking distances, which is a benefit for students walking to school. And then, as I mentioned, we wanted to improve access to awareness of school bus stops, especially for drivers. It's important for them to know that there are students waiting when it's dark. Buses. Next slide. So we're going to jump into the recommendations. The first E, and the one that gets most attention, the engineering, we broke into 3 different tiers for recommendations. The first tier being quick wins, which are low-cost projects that address safety issues across all schools and can be implemented rapidly that would provide immediate benefits. The second tier, what we call Safe Routes to School core projects. These projects are a little bit more capital intensive, but again, focused on improving the safety, walking and biking to schools. And then tier 3 is what we deemed aspirational projects. These projects are more transformational or innovative in nature with their facility design type. So they require a little bit more evaluation and feasibility analysis before implementation for them, but we wanted to include them as a goal to inspire change for the city. Next slide. We can click through those here. So just quickly, the tier 1 recommendations, the quick wins, they address 25 different locations, again, at all schools. They're focused on being rapidly deployed at a very minimal cost. So these include things such as temporary bus stop signage to alert drivers where bus stops are, and we identified 14 different locations for those. It also includes enhancement of 5 different crosswalks, and then adding in a RFB, the rectangular rapid flashing beacon. That's that. Safe Routes to School core projects is really as the name says, the core of the engineering recommendations at least. A total of 54 locations, approximate cost of about $36 million. The goal, and that's a planning level cost estimate, but the goal is to have it be implemented in essentially a 20-year time frame. The projects, we've broken them out into different project types based on what their focus was on. So their bicycle network enhancements, crossing safety, walk zone connectivity enhancements. For projects where there were multiple ones, aspects or types of those items, we put them together into the corridor enhancements, just to call them that. Can we get next? And this gets us to our prioritization process that this tier of projects went through, and I'll have Sam Corbett from also talk us through that.
Can everyone hear me okay? Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. So we went through a prioritization process for all of these Tier 2 Safe Routes to School core projects. And we looked at a number of different criteria, as you can see on this slide. Notably, it was looking at the survey results that Cole mentioned earlier. If a project was identified more times, then it received more points. We also looked at the safety issues. And again, that was based upon the key issues that emerged from the community survey. As Cole mentioned, we're quite focused on equity. So we were looking at median household income and prioritizing projects that were in lower income areas in Carson City. We also considered school proximity. So if projects were within, we looked at quarter-mile bands of all of the schools that were in the study area, and projects that were within that quarter-mile band received points. We also looked at population density, cost efficiency, and project efficiency. So essentially, if a project was already or overlapped with the city CIP, then it would also receive more points in the prioritization process. Ultimately, this allowed us to generate 3 different routes within Tier 2, which we've referred to as near-term, medium-term, and long-term projects. And that will then help the city in terms of prioritizing these core safe routes to school projects. With that, I'll turn it back to Cole to talk about the aspirational projects.
Thank you, Sam. So Tier 3 projects there are aspirational. I can only see, oh, there we go. The aspirational projects, as the name implies, are actually projects to aspire to. They are 26 different locations across Carson City that represent essentially the ideal network of low-stress bicycle facilities for all schools. It's focused on developing facilities that are appropriate for all ages and abilities, and focuses on designing for the most vulnerable road user. And in this context, it would be the school child trying to bike to school. The innovative design facility types that are included within this tier are not typical to Carson City, but examples of them are included in the project document, as well as with the design toolbox, which is an appendix to the document itself. This also includes the protected intersection. You can see an example of that here from Memphis, where they used low-cost options such as bollards or paint to implement a protected intersection design. Similarly, there's no defined timeline for these projects because they are more transformational and require a little bit more feasibility analysis for them. We wanted the city to be able to pull from them, but not be restricted by a time constraint, essentially. And I already mentioned the supplemental safe routes to school design toolbox. Thank you. We're zooming through some pictures here. So the first, there you go, we'll just stick with that one. Sorry, the programmatic engineering projects. These are recommendations that are more policy program level that supplement the engineering need, so to speak, and create a more holistic program. The engineering school safety one is focused on creating a more consistent look and feel for school speed zones across Carson City, and also identifying the initial locations for bus stop enhancements to make drivers more aware of the existence of bus stops. You go to the next one. Next slide. Next. There you go. Thank you. For the education one, this is really just focusing on bolstering the existing efforts. There's some fantastic efforts from the PE teachers that focus on teaching students good bike safety lessons. So wanting to bolster that program, make it more impactful, kind of update maybe some of the equipment that they have. And then also looking at increasing awareness of school safety laws for really all modes. As you can see, this example picture here from Hell's Bells near Eagle Valley. We have a lot of students walking, but a fair amount of them are walking the streets. So just one example of a location for an area for more education, so to speak. Next. The encouragement portion is really, it's the really fun part of Safe Routes to School. We are encouraging students to walk and bike through fun competitions and activities with their classmates and then friends from across town. Next slide. And then the school zone engagement, this is recently changed from enforcement. So it's really just increasing the engagement with law enforcement to make more awareness of what the school safety laws are, increasing compliance from that. Next. Equity is not really a direct recommendation other than it being important for all programmatic recommendations to be implemented in an equitable way. And it's also baked into the engineering recommendations, as Sam mentioned, to the prioritization process to give more weight to disadvantaged portions of the city. And program evaluation is really just making sure that we're tracking what the implementation is, what effects it's having on children walking to school. And that will go to the next slide, which is just next steps, which Kelly covered at the beginning. We'll be getting some feedback from you tonight, and then talking with the Carson City School Board, incorporating that final and coming back September. So for that, I will happy to take any questions. If you have, sorry for a little technical glitch there. I was seeing the totally different part of a screen, so I was kind of guessing at what the slides were for a second. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Cole. Any questions from any of the commissioners? Any questions, Chaz?
Yeah, I have some comments. I thought this was a very thorough study, and I really liked the way you broke it up into the tiers. It shouldn't be too hard to find $200,000 to do the quick win projects. And then I also like that you broke up the core projects tier 2 into near term, medium term, and long term. But how is it anticipated these will be funded? Do we get Safe Routes to School grant money through NDOT, Lucia? Is that how it comes, or how does that work?
That's a great question, Chaz. So, you know, non-motorized transportation is certainly a priority for us. But as you know, funding is very limited. And so we need to be smart about how we go after funding for these types of projects. One way we do it is through our complete streets policy in the city, right? Where we, for every project we do, we look at where we can improve for all modes. And so having this plan will give staff that reference point to say, if we're doing this project for a district for that roadway maintenance, can we add a bike lane, or do we need to add, improve the sidewalks, or do we need to fix some of the signage? So that's one tool. We do have some federal funding sources through NDOT. The Safe Routes to School program right now is funded through a Transportation Alternatives Program, a TAP grant. And the current program is a non-infrastructure grant, but we can go after infrastructure TAP grants just like we fund the freeway multi-use paths, for example. So that's a prime funding source that we anticipate using for this. So yes, absolutely.
So to follow up on that, do we have to sort of apply, and is that competitive? How does that work?
That's correct. We are an urbanized area, however, we're too small, and so we have to compete for every federal dollar that we get.
Thanks. That was it for me.
Cole, before this comes back to us as the final draft, will it be proofed again? Because I noted that there's numerous typos throughout the plan.
Yes, it will be. And you can feel free to send those along if you so desire.
If you could turn to Exhibit 5, page 1.2. in the last paragraph on that page, the last line of the last paragraph, it says, by creating school zones that maximize the proportion of students living over 1 mile away, the Carson City School District may be able to reduce the total number of bus routes, bus stops, and operating costs. I believe, wouldn't that be minimize?
Yes, that is a good catch.
Okay. I'll send you the other ones that I found, but I actually stopped after the first 5 or 6 pages. So I can go back through and send you the ones that I found. Thank you. And this is a non-action item, so I'll do one more call for any questions or comments, and if not, we will move on.
Mr. Chair, can I add to my previous response to Chaz?
No.
Just one additional comment on this. Oh, no.
Oh, go ahead.
Thank you. Just one additional comment. By partnering with the schools and the Washoe Tribe and law enforcement on this plan, it gives us an opportunity to bring in more support. And so when we go after money, there may be opportunity to tap into some non-typical transportation funding, maybe with the school, the tribe, or others. So we keep those things in mind as well.
Yeah, I'm really glad to hear that because, partnering on these things often makes the grant application more competitive. And if you can show more support from the community and our partners in terms of getting kids to school safely, it's can only be beneficial.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Lucia. We are now moving on to agenda item 6E for information only. Presentation and discussion of short and long-term transportation projects for the 2050 Regional Transportation Plan. Dirk?
Thank you, Chair. Dirk Warren for the record. So the 2050 RTP project list identifies transportation needs and goals for our regional transportation system looking out on a 30-year horizon. Projects do include all modes of travel, transit, non-motorized and motorized. The project list functions as an investment tool for implementing transportation projects that are in line with the community's vision and investment priorities. The proposed list of transportation projects are specific to Carson City and has been developed based on existing transportation plans and anticipated network needs. The list is intended to advise CAMPO staff as they work through the development of the 2050 RTP. The list is intended for larger projects versus your smaller surface projects. Requirements for development of an RTP include having a fiscally constrained project list versus just having a huge list versus having a huge wish list. All projects, if all projects cannot be supported by the available revenue, a list of unfunded projects can be created to identify other master plan projects if funding becomes available. This also helps on competitive grants as it shows that the community is vested and that the project has gone through some type of public vetting process. The list includes 4 project buckets. So bucket 1 and 2 are both for the 2030 horizon. One of those is that it can be funded with available revenue as it is fiscally constrained. And then the second one cannot be funded through available revenue. And that's more of a, hey, if funding comes available, this is a good project. Bucket 3 and 4 then go out to projects being completed prior to 2050, again, fiscally constrained and not fiscally constrained. Regarding the district projects, which is new to the RTP list, a 5-year analysis of the performance districts were performed to prioritize transportation projects which were consistent with the Carson City Pavement Management Plan. The analysis evaluated roadways based on pavement management strategies, functional class, roadway volume, crash history, and work history. This is very similar to the past 2 years of the pavement management plan where projects have been identified for the district and then they've been ranked. Prior to identifying annual projects and proceeding to design, each roadway corridor will be evaluated in its respective year to refine the scope, coordinate with other city projects, and to scale the project to fit the available budget. So For District 3, we'll still come back to the Regional Transportation Commission and show our ranking of the projects for District 3. Staff is requesting input on the project list. Question for the commissioners is, do these appear to be the right priorities? Are there other projects that need to be prioritized? After we have identified a list of projects, the next step would be to develop high-level cost estimates. And this then gives us a ballpark figure to see what kind of projects or how much projects we can afford with the available revenue that was presented, I believe, last month to CAMPO. That concludes my comments. I'm happy to answer any questions. One thing to note, since we've had recent comments on it, is that the Curry Street for District 4 is in there, and it includes circulation and safety improvements. And then we also put the safe routes to school as a line item. We didn't identify each project, but we identified that, and the thought is to kind of figure out how much money we've been spending on transportation alternative program projects and kind of use that money and plan projects based on that available funding. So for example, when we looked at what kind of revenue was available, we looked at our award of transportation alternative program projects for the past 4 years, and that's how much revenue we kind of projected. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Dirk, there's 3 projects on here that are partnered with Lyon County and Douglas County. How does that work from the RTC side?
So we are having conversations with Douglas and with Lyon. There's the 2 of them, one in the US 50 and one is US 395, and those corridors span both Lyon and Carson or Douglas and Carson. And so those are in line with some of the results that we're seeing from our travel demand model. And so we've put them on the project, on the project list to kind of say, hey, open up the conversation with NDOT because these are priorities for Carson and also for CAMPO, but they could involve 2 jurisdictions. And then for the other ones, for Douglas County, such as the Hayborn Road connection, and I believe there was one more, mainly the Hayborn Road connection. Douglas County, we've been in discussions with Douglas County. They have the Hayborn extension, and they also have the Vicky Lane, which I believe needs to be added to this based on some recent discussions. But those show an extension of Hayborn Road and Vicky Lane, which start in Douglas County, and then they go into Carson City. It's really hard to have just one project from a jurisdiction standpoint because you have to cross the river and then you have to link into the Carson City network. So you do need to have those 2 jurisdictions on the same page when you're planning for that alignment of the project. And that's why we kind of noted those as 2 jurisdictions.
Thank you. Any other questions from the commissioners? Mark, go ahead.
I'm just a little confused maybe. So you said you like input on priorities, but these aren't prioritized. These are just essentially a long list.
From a priority standpoint, if you look at the project built before 2030 column, those will probably be your high priority ones. And then from a priority standpoint, we'll be going back to the RTC for the annual district projects, and that's when we'll be really prioritizing them from a city standpoint. This is more of Carson City communicating to CAMPO. So one hat goes off, one hat goes on, but communicating to CAMPO to say, hey, these are the projects that we want to prioritize, and the way we prioritize them from a CAMPO 30-year horizon document is we say, hey, here are the 2 buckets, 2030 and 2050, and then you can also kind of drill down and say, we've identified revenue for this, or this is a wish list item. Maybe we're hoping to go after some, FLAP grant or something else to try and get that funding.
Chaz, any questions?
So I realize looks like it's a pretty high level overview. We have a project name and an extent and a brief description. I had a real hard time figuring out where some of these projects might be. I mean, for example, Lumper Lane Extension, Modoc Road to Airport Road. construct new collector, you know, a map would be helpful. I don't know if you want to show all these new roads on a map, but I think if they're going to be in the RTP, we've got to have some idea of where they're going to go, and so that we can figure out how much they're going to cost.
That's a great comment. We do have a map. It just, we just didn't get there in time. We will be presenting that map to you folks in the future, but also to the 2 virtual meetings that we have on Tuesday and Wednesday. So that project map has been created, and so is forthcoming. Thank you for the comment.
Okay. And then some of these, for example, the Robinson Street extension, which goes into Lompa Ranch, wouldn't that be built as part of the Lompa Ranch development? I mean, wouldn't that be a privately funded project?
That is correct. So for example, on Robinson Street, we identified it as a project before 2030, but then we did not check the box for fiscally constrained because it is a condition of the Lompa Ranch development. But we do want to include it in our travel demand model because it can have a significant impact on our network. And so whenever we do have a development that has been conditioned for those improvements or have triggered those improvements themselves, those are when we would be seeing those projects would also go on the unfiscally constrained list, just to identify that as a significant project to the network.
Okay, thanks. And then another project that's not on the list, at least I couldn't see it, but is the #1 item on the Safe Routes to School program is Kings Canyon Road, Ormsby to Thames. And, you know, that's another very constricted access for those folks who live up in the Longview subdivision to get to either the middle school or Boardwick Bray. And so, shouldn't that be on the list here somewhere?
Great comment again. The reason why Kings Canyon didn't make it on this list was when we looked at our pavement management software, that road came up as a pavement preservation project, as in the pavement is in good shape, and we were not looking to do a reconstruct or a mill and overlay. So it was a surface treatment. So when we come back to you in a month or so to present the when we come back in the following future years, because I believe it's District 4, if I remember correctly, that project will be on as a surface treatment. But as Lucia mentioned, every project, whether it's a rehabilitation or a pavement preservation, will be evaluated in complete streets. And then we'll be looking at available resources to try and find that balance. And we will be consulting the plans, such as Safe Routes to School, to identify improvements that have been noted with other master plans.
Chaz, I'm going to also jump in here. I'll just add that this draft list was created before the draft of the master plan came out, so we're doing some of these things concurrently, right? I think your comment on the Kings Canyon connector for non-motorized is a really good one, and so we can look at. We don't necessarily have to include those joint road and non-motorized projects at the same time. So why don't we, Dirk and I'll take it back and talk about whether we can pull that out as a specific project, even though it is unfunded.
Okay, great, because I think it's good I mean, for 2030 is 10 years, so hopefully we should at least be on the list, I think, in some shape or form. So,
and those are the types of comments we're looking for, right? If there's known projects, bigger projects, even if they're not funded, that we should add on this list for the plan.
Okay, great. I did have another question. So how do grant-funded projects fit in? If we, I mean, in that Kings Canyon one's a good example because in the Safe Routes to School, they recommended a separated path. But I mean, another alternative would be to have bike lanes and sidewalk. And there's no right of way, so either of these are going to be really tough to actually achieve. But nonetheless, we need to have them on the list. But then if we get some grant funding to do them, I guess, do they have to be on the list to qualify for the grant funding, or how does that work?
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Dirk.
Okay. It should be on the list. especially if we're anticipating going after federal funds. In order for us to use federal funds, it would need to be in our transportation improvement program. And there's a requirement also that if you have a project within your transportation improvement program, that project also needs to be in your regional transportation plan so that those two, federal documents, if you will, align.
Okay, thanks. That's it for me.
Thank you, Chaz. All right, I think I had a question and I don't remember what it was now, so I will call one more time for questions from the commissioners, and I see no. Okay, well, thank you for the presentation. And when will we see this next?
We'll be present, at a minimum, you'll be seeing this with the draft with RTP, with RTP. But as we continue to move forward with creating elements of the regional transportation plan, we plan on bringing this back before probably CAMPO. So CAMPO would probably be the next point when you would see it. I don't have an exact month, unless Lucia does.
Yeah, I'll just add, there may be an item next month if specifically the board wanted to see something. But otherwise, the plan is most likely we're shooting for a release of the draft RTP at the September CAMPO meeting and a final, barring any substantial changes, at the October meeting.
Thank you. Okay, I think we are now on agenda item 6F. For information only, presentation and discussion of the recently redesigned school zones within Carson City and resulting updates to the speed limit policy establishing guidelines for school zone signage posted within designated Carson City school zones. Chris, I believe you have this one.
Nah, I'm going to take it. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is Lucia.
Okay.
I'll keep this brief. The Carson City Board of Supervisors redesignated school zones at their June 4th meeting through Resolution 2020 R14. Previously, school zones had not been redesignated since 1992. And since then, as you know, travel behavior and development patterns in Carson City have changed. When schools closed, and really best practices for establishment of school zones has evolved. Accordingly, it is necessary to erect consistent and enforceable roadway signage in designated school zones in advance of next school year. The recently implemented speed limit policy, which was brought to you, I believe it was last month or the month before, we did revise that to clarify standard speed limit signage protocols for school zones throughout the city. Implementation of the signage will result in consistent signage, which will improve safety, improve predictability for drivers, and improve enforceability by Carson City Sheriff's Office. We developed this policy, if you will, for school zone signage in conjunction and coordination with the school district as well as Carson City Sheriff's Office. What we found across the city with current signage is it's very inconsistent now. If you've seen the little signs that exist, the font is very small. It's 7:15 to 8:45, 2:30 to 3:15, and as a driver, when you're approaching those signs, they're very hard to read. So what's included in the policy within the exhibit is a diagram of a standard sign that we're looking to implement, which would be 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. Monday through Friday. In consulting with the Nevada Revised Statutes, NRS, school zone speed limit signage is enforceable only within a half hour before school starts to a half hour after school ends, and specifically the language is in operation. And so we consulted with the school district closely to understand when the school is in operation and when we would have a window that can be consistent across town. So they were emphatically supportive of this change. Staff are looking at ways to fund the implementation of these signs, and of course we didn't want to do it in a vacuum, so this is an informational item, but we're happy to take any questions and if there's any concern or looking for more detail on this. Thank you.
Lucia, one comment that I have is that on the school zone maps that go with the presentation, These are the maps from prior to the resolution being approved. So the proposed and present school zones are not, they're no longer present and proposed. They're previous and current, or previous and,
Thank you for clarifying. Absolutely. So these are the exhibits that the Board of Supervisors approved. So what they say is proposed, that's the new school zones that we're looking to sign.
yeah, I'm just thinking if you have this presentation to give to anybody else, that you might update those so that it's not as confusing.
Great comment. Thank you so much.
Any other comments or questions from any of the commissioners? No? Chaz?
No.
Okay. All right, that was also information only. Thank you, Lucia and Dirk, for that presentation. We will now move on to agenda item 7, internal communications and administrative matters, non-action items. We will begin with item 7A, transportation manager's report. Lucia?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a follow-up on the Kings Canyon Federal Lands Access Program, the FLAP project that we have ongoing. Following the comments received from the RTC, the Parks and Recreation Commission, and the Open Space Advisory Committee, staff did submit a compilation of comments to Central Federal Lands. Central Federal Lands expressed a need to expedite the schedule in order to obligate the federal funds in this current federal fiscal year, which means getting to 100% design before October 1st. And when you work backwards with their schedule, they're looking to get approval or final tweaks on the design by August 15th. So they're turning around our comments very quickly, and I just wanted to let you know that you can expect to see 95 or 100% designs that reflect the comments that we heard back at the August RTC meeting. Also wanted to give an update on the South Carson project. Early August, we expect the full closure of South Carson for the roundabout. The contract has that full closure for up to 6 weeks. Staff will continue to work with the contractor to see if there's any ways to compress that schedule and minimize closures, and of course maximize access to those nearby businesses. With regard to progress to date, we're all done with the water lines. We're finishing the stormwater and the wastewater in the next very soon. And so we'll be out of the ground by the end of the month. So for those that are familiar with the engineering of that, it's a big milestone for us. Overall, we are on schedule. We were ahead of schedule by a couple days. We've kind of fallen back by a couple days, but we're still on track, and the team is making good progress. In coordination with the South Carson project, we're also making progress on the Fairview reconstruct from Carson to Route. We did get a complaint or an inquiry from the Lowe's regarding access to that parking lot. Staff have been really responsive. We haven't received a lot of complaints, so I think that's a testament to the outreach that's been done by Rachel Snyder and the Carson Proud team, as well as the Public Works team. Separate from those, unless there's any questions on those two projects, I'll keep going. If you've driven around town, you'll see the slurry jobs for District 2 are for the most part complete. Those are Russell over by William, Solomon, and Roop. We're completing the RRFB over on Solomon in front of Fremont Elementary School. That should be completed in the next week or so. And finally, just an update on the Airport Road Sewer and Roadway Rehabilitation Project. That project has hit some hurdles. We've been struggling through a lot of the utility work, but continue to make progress. There is a planned, we're calling it a marathon weekend, where it's a full closure of the north-south on Airport across US 50 East for 2 weekends. And that's scheduled, we're looking at it right now, most likely in August. So we'll keep you updated on how that progresses. There were substantial impacts to the neighbors here, but surprisingly, they've been very excited and very pleased with the work. We haven't gotten hardly any complaints, and again, the team's been doing a really good job. So that concludes my updates on the capital projects. I'm happy to answer any other questions that you might have.
Anybody have any questions? Chaz?
No, but I will take the opportunity to vent just a little at the Central Federal Lands. The reason they're up against the deadline is because they dilly-dallied for so long at the front end. That's all I will say.
Thank you, Chaz. Needed to be said. It's all right, then we'll move on to agenda item 7B, Street Operations Activity Report. Dirk.
Thank you, Chair. So for the street operations activity report, which is for the month of May, a few things that Justin Tierney, the street supervisor, wanted me to mention was that there was significant ditch work and shoulder work up on Bonanza Road, which is north of Arrowhead just a little bit. And then also, he did want to note that 2 of the street sweepers have been broken down. So the numbers in kind of in the tail end of this report and quite a bit in June will be significantly lower until we get those 2 sweepers up and operational. That concludes my comments.
So that was one of the questions I was going to ask, is why the number was the same for the shoulder work and the ditches cleared, but that's because it was the same section of road, right? They repaired the shoulder and cleared the ditches on the same section of road?
I believe so. That was in the discussions I had. That's correct.
Okay. Any other questions? Chaz? No? Okay. All right. Thank you, Dirk. We are now on agenda item 8, board comments for information only, status reports and comments from the members of the RTC board. We'll start with you, Chaz.
No comments. I've said enough tonight. Thank you.
Greg? Mark?
Nope.
All right. Moving on to agenda item 9. The next meeting is scheduled after the CAMPO meeting on Wednesday, August 12th, right here in the Sierra Room at the Community Center. And Desi, anybody on the line for final public comment?
I see no public comment, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, sir. We are now on agenda item 11 for adjournment. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
We are adjourned. Thank you all for participating.